This story is titled, During Our Fight, My Wife Playfully Blocked My Number thinking I'd buy a new phone to reach her, but instead I cut her off forever by sending divorce papers as my final message. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be posting something like this anywhere on the internet. I'm a pretty private person by nature, but I desperately need to get this story off my chest. Maybe someone else out there can learn from the massive mistakes I made along the way. Fair warning, this is going to be a long one, so settle in if you're planning to read the whole thing. Let me start with some background about myself. I'm a 32-year-old male working as a structural engineer for our state transportation department. It's not the most glamorous career in the world, but it provides stability and comes with solid benefits. The pay is decent, especially when you factor in overtime opportunities that come up fairly regularly. I met my now ex-wife Jessica about 6 years ago at a friend's housewarming party. She was 29 at the time and working as a marketing consultant, pulling in maybe around $40,000 annually. From day one, she was always talking about her big plans and how she was going to make it big in the business world someday. We really hit it off that night, and the chemistry was undeniable. After dating for 8 months, we decided to move in together. A year after that, we got married. Looking back now with the clarity that only comes from hindsight, there were red flags scattered throughout our relationship that I completely ignored. I guess I was blinded by the fact that she was absolutely gorgeous. And honestly, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The first major red flag should have been when she lost her job just 3 months after our wedding. Instead of immediately jumping back into the job market, she decided she wanted to find herself before committing to another corporate position. That whole finding herself phase ended up lasting 2 full years, during which I paid for absolutely everything while she explored her options. The second red flag that I somehow missed was her spending pattern whenever I received a bonus or a raise at work. It was like clockwork. Every single time my income increased, suddenly she needed a new designer handbag or wanted to renovate some part of the condo that I had purchased before we even met. I was too blind and too in love to recognize the pattern for what it really was. I thought I understood what betrayal felt like before this all happened. There was that time in college when my roommate stole my thesis idea and presented it as his own work. Then there was the incident with my buddy Tyler, who screwed me out of money in our fantasy football league. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I discovered on my phone that night in my hotel room. The words on my screen read, "All calls from this contact will be silenced." I sat there in my cramped hotel room in Jacksonville, trying to process what I was seeing. My wife had deliberately muted my calls. Not just any calls, but specifically my calls. For 2 entire weeks. The same 2 weeks I had been away from home, handling all the devastating arrangements for my mother's funeral. The same 2 weeks I had been calling her every single day, sometimes twice, desperately needing to hear her familiar voice while I watched my mother slip away from this world. The cancer took my mother fast, too damn fast for any of us to properly prepare. One minute, she was simply complaining about her shoulder hurting, nothing that seemed particularly concerning. The next minute, doctors were sitting us down and telling us she had maybe 3 months to live. She barely made it 6 weeks. 6 weeks from initial diagnosis to death. I still can't wrap my head around how quickly everything changed. Every single night in that cold, sterile hotel room, I would call Jessica without fail. Every night, I would get her voicemail or receive a quick text message saying she was completely swamped with a new client project or that she was out having drinks with Monica from college. I believed every excuse she gave me. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my life partner, the one person in this world who was supposed to have my back when life decided to kick me in the balls. Looking at those words glowing on my phone screen, all calls from this contact will be silenced. I felt like someone had literally punched a hole straight through my chest. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't think clearly. I just sat there in that oppressively quiet hotel room with the crushing weight of both my mother's death and my wife's betrayal pressing down on me simultaneously. My mother had been everything to me throughout my entire life. She raised me completely by herself after my father walked out on us when I was only 8 years old. She worked 2 different jobs just to put me through college, never once complaining or making me feel like I was some kind of burden on her life. And now she was gone forever. The one person I needed most in this world had deliberately chosen to silence me during the darkest hour of my entire existence. I made the decision to fly back home early from Jacksonville. My mother's house had been cleared out completely, the funeral service was over, and all the immediate arrangements had been handled. The remaining paperwork and administrative details could wait for another time. I needed to be home with Jessica. I needed to feel her arms wrapped around me and finally allow myself to break down and grieve properly for the first time since this whole nightmare began. When I arrived at our condo, the silence that greeted me was almost physically painful after weeks of chaos, hospital noise, and funeral arrangements. I was completely exhausted, emotionally, mentally, and physically drained from everything I'd been through. I collapsed onto our couch, too tired to even make it to the bedroom. That's when I heard the notification sound coming from nearby. Jessica's iPad was sitting right there on the coffee table, and the screen had lit up with an incoming text message. The preview was clearly visible on the lock screen, and what I read made my stomach drop into my shoes. I miss you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to take you to Miami once the divorce is final. You deserve way better than that boring engineer. I'm not the type of person who snoops through other people's private messages. I never have been, and I've always believed that trust is fundamental to any relationship. But something deep in my gut twisted hard when I saw those words displayed so casually on her screen. With hands that were visibly shaking, I picked up the iPad and stared at the message more closely. The sender's name wasn't visible on the lock screen preview, but the content of the message was crystal clear and unmistakable. I carefully put the device back down exactly where I had found it, making sure it was positioned the same way. Then I called Jessica one more time from my phone. As I dialed her number, I watched the iPad intently. Nothing happened. No notification, no ring, no sign that a call was coming through. That's when I decided to check her phone settings through our shared iCloud account, a feature we had set up years ago in case one of us ever lost our phone and needed to locate it. There it was, plain as day. My contact information had been muted exactly 2 weeks ago, the exact same day I had flown out to Jacksonville after receiving the devastating news about my mother's terminal diagnosis. This wasn't some kind of technical glitch or accidental setting change. She had deliberately and intentionally silenced me on purpose during the absolute worst moment of my entire life. While I was picking out my mother's casket and crying myself to sleep in empty hotel rooms night after night, my wife was living a completely different life. One where I was nothing more than an inconvenience to be muted and ignored. I heard the sound of keys jingling in the front door, and I quickly wiped the tears from my face, trying to compose myself before she walked in. When Jessica entered the condo, she completely froze in the doorway. I could see shock written all over her face, followed immediately by something that looked an awful lot like guilt, before she managed to compose herself and put on a more neutral expression. She was wearing a dress that I had never seen before in my life, and she was carrying multiple shopping bags from expensive stores like Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue. "You're back early," she said, her voice noticeably tight and strained. Not "I missed you so much" or "I'm so sorry for your loss and about your mom." Just pure annoyance that I had apparently ruined whatever plan she had for the evening. I looked at her carefully, really looked at her for what felt like the first time in years. I suddenly realized that I was staring at a complete stranger. 5 years of marriage, countless shared experiences and memories, and I suddenly didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me at all. Her nails were freshly manicured and professionally done. She had new highlights in her hair that must have cost a fortune. She was wearing what looked like a $400 dress that I had never seen before. All of this when she was supposedly so incredibly busy with work that she couldn't even answer my phone calls. "We need to talk," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite everything I was feeling inside. "But first, I need to know something specific. Why did you mute my calls?" Her face went completely pale in an instant. In that single moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't some kind of misunderstanding or simple mistake. This was the beginning of the end of everything we had built together. The silence that stretched between us felt heavy and almost solid, like it had physical weight. She clutched her expensive shopping bags against her chest, as if they were somehow more important than whatever conversation we were about to have. "My phone's been acting up lately," she finally said with an exaggerated eye roll, as if I was being ridiculous for even asking. "I've been missing notifications from everyone, not just you. You know how unreliable iPhones can be sometimes." It was such an easy, obvious lie. I could have disproven it in a matter of seconds by showing her the specific settings in her iCloud account that clearly showed my contact had been deliberately muted. But I didn't bother wasting my time or energy. What was the point of arguing with someone who was willing to lie so casually to my face? She dropped her shopping bags on the kitchen counter and started pulling out clothes that still had the price tags attached. Look what I found on sale today. This was only $280, marked down from $350. She actually expected me to be excited about her shopping spree while I was still processing my mother's death and dealing with the aftermath of the funeral. Your mother would have loved this scarf, she added casually, holding up some overpriced piece of fabric. It's too bad she never got to see it. Too bad she never got to see it. My mother was dead, and that's what she chose to say. Not, I'm so sorry for your loss, or, how are you holding up during this difficult time? Just a casual comment about how it was too bad my deceased mother never got to see her new scarf. I nodded slowly and stood up from the couch. I'm really tired from the flight. I need to take a shower and get some rest. Once I was alone in the bathroom with the shower running at full blast to mask any sounds I might make, I began what I can only describe as my investigation into my own marriage. The message on Jessica's iPad had given me a crucial clue, but I knew I needed much more concrete evidence before making any major decisions. I logged into our shared cloud account from my phone, and within just a few minutes, I had all the answers I needed, and more. The location history feature showed regular visits to an address in the wealthiest part of town, where all the doctors and lawyers live in their expensive houses. Text messages with a contact that was cleverly saved under the name Kelly Yoga Class, an obvious attempt to hide the real identity of whoever she was communicating with. This was especially suspicious since Jessica hadn't actually been to a yoga class in the 3 years since I had paid for her expensive annual membership at that upscale studio downtown. But the most damning evidence came in the form of photos that I was clearly never meant to see. Picture after picture of Jessica with some guy who had slicked back hair and was wearing what looked like a genuine Rolex watch. They were dining together at expensive restaurants that I could never afford on my civil servant salary. All of these photos were taken during the exact time period when my mother was dying in the hospital. All of this was happening while I was calling her every day, desperate for comfort and emotional support during the most painful period of my entire life. The betrayal wasn't just the affair itself, though that was devastating enough. It was the deliberate, calculated choice to silence me during the most emotionally vulnerable time I had ever experienced. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake or a moment of weakness. This was planned, methodical cruelty designed to keep me from interfering with her new life. When I finally came out of the bathroom, Jessica was sitting casually on our bed, scrolling through her phone as if absolutely nothing was wrong with the world. "Are you hungry?" she asked, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I could order something for dinner, though we should probably choose something on the cheaper side since you've been spending so much money on hotels recently." She said this as if I had been on some kind of vacation, instead of watching my mother die and making funeral arrangements. "Sure," I replied, matching her casual tone perfectly. "Whatever you want to order is fine with me." That night, we sat at our dining table eating takeout food in near-complete silence, with the television providing background noise that neither of us was actually listening to. I watched Jessica carefully throughout the meal, noticing how frequently she checked her phone and how she always angled the screen away from me whenever it vibrated with a new message. At one point, her entire body visibly tensed before she quickly excused herself to go to the bathroom, taking her phone with her. While she was gone, I seriously considered confronting her immediately with everything I had discovered. The evidence was absolutely overwhelming and undeniable. The rage that was building inside me was practically screaming for release, demanding that I expose her lies and betrayal right then and there. But something stopped me from acting on that impulse. A cold, calculating voice in my head that urged patience and careful planning. It was actually my mother's voice that I heard, giving me advice she had shared countless times throughout my life. Never make important decisions when you're angry. Sleep on it first, then decide what to do. I wasn't going to react emotionally and give Jessica the satisfaction of seeing me completely break down. Instead, I made a deliberate decision that night. This wouldn't turn into a messy, emotional confrontation where she could manipulate the situation or play the victim. This would be a strategic, methodical dismantling of the life we had built together. She had betrayed me during my absolute darkest hour, and the consequences for her actions would be deliberate, calculated, and absolutely final. That night, we slept on completely opposite sides of our king-sized bed, with what felt like 1,000,000 miles of emotional distance between us. I could feel her occasionally glancing in my direction throughout the night, probably wondering if I suspected anything or if her careful facade was starting to crack. I pretended to be fast asleep, but my mind was racing with plans and next steps for what I knew had to happen. When morning finally arrived, Jessica announced that she had to go meet a client for a few hours of work. on a Saturday morning, which was just another transparent lie to add to her growing collection. I nodded and told her to take all the time she needed, acting as if I completely believed her story. The front door had barely closed behind her when I began moving with focused purpose and determination. First, I conducted a thorough check of our financial situation. Thank God I had never added Jessica's name to the deed of my condo. That was going to save me a tremendous amount of legal headaches down the road. We did have a joint checking account that contained about $8,500, which was mostly money that I had earned and deposited. We also had a shared savings account with another $42,000. And again, the vast majority of that money had come from my income since Jessica hadn't held down a real job with steady pay in several years. I immediately called my bank and transferred all but $500 from both accounts into a brand new account that was solely in my name. Next, I contacted a divorce attorney that I had researched during my sleepless night, leaving a detailed voicemail message requesting an urgent appointment as soon as possible. Then I began the painstaking process of documenting absolutely everything I had discovered. I took screenshots of all the incriminating messages, saved copies of the photos, and downloaded the location data that proved her lies. I approached this like the engineer I am, clinical, methodical, and completely detached from the emotional aspects. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Running late with this client meeting, don't wait up for dinner tonight. I might be back super late." I didn't even bother responding to her obvious lie. Instead, I drove directly to the address that I had found in her location history. It turned out to be an upscale high-rise apartment building complete with a uniformed doorman and professional valet parking service. I parked across the street and settled in to wait and observe. About 20 minutes later, I watched as Jessica pulled up in our SUV, the practical vehicle that I had purchased last year and that she constantly complained was too boring and not stylish enough for her image. She handed the keys to the valet like she owned the place and walked into the building with complete confidence. I carefully took photos of everything, noting the exact time and date for my records. This was just more evidence to add to my growing collection. When I returned to our condo, I decided to check our credit card statements online. There it was, clear as day. Thousands of dollars in charges over the past 2 weeks. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, high-end boutiques, and spa treatments. All of this extravagant spending had occurred while I was making funeral arrangements for my mother and dealing with the worst grief of my life. I packed a small overnight bag with just the essentials. This wasn't me running away from the situation. This was a tactical decision. I needed physical and emotional space to think clearly and plan my next moves without having to constantly monitor my reactions while she was watching my every expression. As I was preparing to leave the condo, Jessica's iPad suddenly lit up again with another incoming message. This one was from the same Kelly yoga class contact, and the preview was clearly visible on the lock screen. "Left you a surprise in the kitchen drawer. Wear it tonight." The casual, comfortable tone of the message made it obvious that this wasn't some new development. This relationship had been going on for a long time, probably well before my mother's diagnosis was even a factor. The realization should have completely crushed what was left of my spirit, but instead it had the opposite effect. It hardened my resolve and crystallized my determination. I had just lost my mother, the one person in this world who had loved me unconditionally throughout my entire life. Now I was losing my wife, but not to death or some tragic circumstance beyond anyone's control. I was losing her to her own selfish, calculated choices. The pain I was feeling was slowly but surely transforming into something cold, focused, and utterly determined. I checked into a Marriott hotel downtown and sat on the edge of the generic hotel bed, staring at my phone. Jessica's contact information was right there on the screen, representing 5 years of marriage, countless text messages and phone calls, shared memories, and broken promises. With 3 simple taps on the screen, I blocked her number completely. This wasn't an emotional decision made in the heat of anger. This was strategic and deliberate. She had wanted silence from me, and now I was going to give her exactly what she had asked for. But unlike her cowardly approach, I would do this openly, directly, and permanently. This was just the very beginning of my response to her betrayal. She had absolutely no idea what was coming next. My phone exploded with notifications throughout the night. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, all from Jessica's number. I didn't read a single message or listen to any of the voicemails. Each desperate attempt at contact only confirmed what I already knew in my heart. She wasn't concerned about me or my well-being. She wasn't worried about our marriage or trying to make amends. She was concerned about herself, about being caught in her lies, and about the potential consequences of her actions. The next morning, I met with the divorce attorney I had contacted. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to my entire story without any judgment or surprise. I methodically presented all the evidence I had gathered, the incriminating messages, the photos of Jessica with her lover, the location data that proved her lies, and the detailed financial records showing exactly how she had been spending my money while I was dealing with my mother's illness. She nodded approvingly as she reviewed everything, taking careful notes. "You've done more preliminary homework than most of my clients do," she commented with obvious professional respect. "That's going to serve you very well in these proceedings, especially the detailed financial documentation you've compiled." We spent the next hour discussing legal strategy and what I could realistically expect from the divorce process. Georgia is a no-fault divorce state, which meant that Jessica's infidelity wouldn't necessarily have a direct impact on how our assets would be divided. However, my thorough documentation would definitely help establish a clear pattern of deception and financial misconduct that could prove very useful during settlement negotiations. The fact that you owned the condo before your marriage and kept the deeds solely in your name is hugely beneficial to your case, she explained carefully. And these financial records showing her excessive spending habits during your mother's terminal illness? Well, judges are human beings too, and they don't respond well to that kind of callous behavior. I signed all the necessary paperwork to officially initiate divorce proceedings, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me as I wrote my signature on each document. "Most people are complete emotional wrecks when they first come to see me," the attorney observed thoughtfully as we concluded our meeting. "You seem remarkably focused for someone going through this kind of situation." "I buried my mother last week," I replied with complete honesty. "This is just another funeral, except this time I'm not grieving something real." As I was leaving her office, I decided to check my voicemail messages. There were 23 different messages waiting for me. Most of them were from Jessica, but the last one immediately caught my attention because it wasn't from her at all. It was from her father, Robert, and his tone was serious and concerned. "Listen, son, we need to talk," his voice said through the phone speaker. "Jessica's beside herself about whatever happened between you two. You can work this out, whatever it is. She says there's been some kind of major misunderstanding, so please call me back as soon as you get this message." So Jessica had already rallied her family to her cause, spinning the situation to make herself look like the innocent victim of some terrible misunderstanding. I deleted the voicemail message without bothering to respond to her father's request. Back at the hotel, I created a comprehensive list of everyone who would need to be informed about our separation. This included close friends, family members, and even our landlord for various utilities and services. I wasn't planning to hide from this situation or feel ashamed about what was happening. I hadn't done anything wrong, and I wasn't going to act like I had. I carefully drafted a simple, factual message that I would send to people at the appropriate time. I wanted to let you know that Jessica and I are divorcing due to her infidelity during my mother's illness. I appreciate your respect for my privacy during this difficult time. No emotional appeals, no unnecessary details, just the straightforward truth about what had happened. My phone rang again, and this time it was Jessica's mother calling. I declined the call without hesitation. Then another call came in from a mutual friend of ours, clearly part of the coordinated campaign to pressure me into reconsidering my decision. The systematic attempt to manipulate me had officially begun, but I wasn't going to be swayed by emotional manipulation or family pressure. I turned my phone off completely and focused my attention on the practical next steps I needed to take. I logged into our Netflix account and immediately changed the password. I did the same thing with Hulu, Disney+, and every other streaming subscription that I had been paying for throughout our marriage. These were small actions, but they felt incredibly satisfying in the moment. Next, I called my HR department at work and officially removed Jessica from my health insurance policy. She had been so proud of quitting her job with benefits because she could simply use mine instead. Well, that arrangement was about to come to an abrupt end. I logged into all of my investment accounts and systematically removed her as a beneficiary from every single one. Then I called my life insurance company and did exactly the same thing. One by one, I methodically removed Jessica from every single aspect of my financial life. She had always wanted to be with a wealthy man who could provide for her every need. Now she was about to learn what it actually meant to support herself completely. The divorce paperwork was officially filed with the court, and my attorney assured me that we had done everything properly according to Georgia state law. Now came what she warned me would be the most difficult part of the entire process: waiting. waiting for Jessica to be officially served with the papers, waiting for the legal wheels to slowly turn and the process to move forward through the court system. On the fourth day after filing the divorce papers, I received a text message from Jake, my buddy who works with me at the transportation department. "Dude, your wife is here in the office lobby, and she looks absolutely pissed," he wrote. "Security wants to know what they should do about the situation." I felt a flash of genuine anger at this blatant invasion of my workplace. Jessica was clearly escalating the situation and trying to force a confrontation on her terms, in a public setting where she probably thought I'd be more likely to give in to avoid making a scene. I immediately texted Jake back. "Tell security to escort her out of the building immediately. I'll handle this situation myself." I called Jessica directly from my office phone, and when she answered, the hope and relief in her voice was absolutely palpable. "You finally called me," she said, and I could hear the desperation beneath her words. "We really need to talk in person about all of this." "What the hell is wrong with you?" she continued before I could respond. "The bank accounts are completely empty. My credit cards aren't working anymore. This is insane." "Please leave my workplace immediately," I replied, keeping my voice completely level and professional. "If you want to communicate with me about anything, do it through my attorney." Her contact information was included in the papers you received yesterday. "Papers?" Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine confusion. "What papers are you talking about? Are you completely out of your mind right now?" So she was going to pretend that she hadn't been officially served with the divorce papers. This was just another manipulation tactic in her growing arsenal of lies and deception. "You know exactly what I'm referring to," I said calmly. "Leave the building now or I'll have security physically remove you from the premises." "You can't do this to me!" she screamed into the phone, her voice becoming shrill and hysterical. "After everything I've done for you throughout our entire relationship, who's going to pay for my car payments, the condo expenses, my new Peloton bike?" I hung up the phone before she could continue her tirade. Through my office window, I had a clear view of the building's main entrance, and I watched as security guards escorted Jessica from the lobby. She kept looking up at the windows, scanning back and forth as if she was trying to spot exactly which office I was in. Her mascara was running down her face in dark streaks, and she looked completely unhinged. I stepped back from the window, moving out of sight. My phone immediately buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was from him, Jessica's lover, and his message was both threatening and pathetic at the same time. "This has gone way too far, and you're seriously hurting her," he wrote. "Man to man, we need to talk about this situation. You have no idea who you're messing with right now." The sheer audacity was almost laughable. Here was the man who had been sleeping with my wife while I was burying my mother, and now he had the nerve to threaten me and act like I was the one causing problems. I blocked his number without bothering to respond to his pathetic attempt at intimidation. That evening, I decided to return to the condo when I knew Jessica wouldn't be there. I needed to collect more of my personal belongings and check on the condition of the property. When I opened the front door, I completely froze in shock. The entire place had been absolutely trashed. I'm talking about complete destruction. Clothes thrown everywhere, dishes smashed against the walls, furniture overturned and damaged. I walked through each room in stunned silence, documenting the destruction with my phone's camera. My expensive gaming setup had been completely smashed to pieces. My carefully curated collection of vintage comic books had been ripped apart and scattered across the floor. But what hit me the hardest was seeing my mother's antique jewelry box lying shattered on the bedroom floor. The precious keepsakes that she had left me scattered and broken among the debris. I felt a wave of cold, controlled rage wash over me as I stood there photographing my mother's precious keepsakes destroyed and scattered across the floor. But I didn't allow myself to clean anything up or try to salvage what remained. This destruction was just more evidence to add to my growing case file, and I needed to document everything exactly as I had found it. I immediately called the police and filed an official report for property damage and destruction. The officer who responded to my call took one look around the condo and let out a low whistle of disbelief. "Divorce situation?" he asked with genuine sympathy in his voice, clearly having seen this type of vindictive destruction before. I nodded grimly. "Yeah, that's exactly what this is. I've seen this kind of thing before, brother," he said while taking notes and photographs. "Make sure you document absolutely everything, and if this property is solely in your name, I'd strongly recommend changing all the locks immediately." Since the deed was entirely in my name and Jessica had never been added to it, I called a locksmith on the spot and had him come out to change every single lock on the property. I wasn't taking any chances on her returning to cause even more damage or destruction. Then I sent Jessica a direct text message. The police have officially documented all the property damage you caused. Do not attempt to enter the condo again under any circumstances. All future communication must go through our attorneys only. Within literally minutes of sending that message, my phone completely exploded with incoming calls and text messages from Jessica herself, her parents, and even her sister, who I had maybe met twice during our entire relationship. The coordinated family pressure campaign was now in full swing, but I ignored every single attempt at contact. My attorney was absolutely thrilled when I showed her the new evidence of Jessica's destructive rampage. "This strengthens our case significantly," she said with obvious satisfaction. "Destruction of property, particularly the sentimental items related to your recently deceased mother, well, that shows a vindictive character that definitely won't play well in front of a judge." The very next day, I received what can only be described as a laughably amateur cease and desist letter from some lawyer I had never heard of. The letter claimed that I had somehow illegally evicted Jessica from her rightful residence and had stolen her personal possessions. When I forwarded the letter to my attorney, she actually laughed out loud. "This is amateur hour legal work," she said dismissively. "The condo is solely in your name and was purchased before your marriage. She has absolutely no legal claim to it as a residence without being on the deed, especially under Georgia property law. And as for personal possessions, we have detailed documentation of what belongs to whom." We responded immediately with our own professional letter, outlining all the documented property damage that Jessica had caused and stating clearly that any items that genuinely belonged to her could be collected under proper legal supervision after a complete inventory had been conducted. The financial reality of her situation was finally starting to hit Jessica hard. The credit cards that she had been using so freely were actually tied to my accounts and had been completely canceled. The generous monthly allowance that she had become completely accustomed to over the years was gone forever. The luxurious lifestyle that she had been living entirely on my salary had evaporated overnight, leaving her with nothing. Through our mutual friends, I started hearing that Jessica was staying with her lover, the guy with the expensive Rolex watch. But apparently, his enthusiasm for their relationship was rapidly waning now that he was actually expected to pay for her considerable expenses and maintain her expensive lifestyle habits. Meanwhile, I made the conscious decision to focus entirely on rebuilding my life from the ground up. I moved back into my condo permanently and spent considerable time and effort cleaning up the mess that Jessica had left behind. I began the process of replacing everything that had been destroyed, prioritizing the items that actually mattered to me rather than the superficial things that had impressed her. I carefully gathered what remained of my mother's keepsakes and placed them in a secure, safe deposit box at the bank, where they could never be touched or damaged again. At work, I threw myself completely into a major infrastructure project that had been assigned to our department. My focused dedication and attention to detail earned genuine praise from upper management and positioned me perfectly for a promotion that would come with a significant salary increase. The professional focus felt incredibly productive and therapeutic, giving me something constructive to channel my energy into. Jessica's desperate attempts at contact became increasingly frantic and pathetic as time went on. The tone of her messages shifted dramatically from pure anger to desperate pleading. "I made a terrible mistake," she texted from yet another new phone number. "Please, we can work this out somehow. I didn't mean to hurt you the way I did." I forwarded every single message directly to my attorney without bothering to respond, and then immediately blocked each new number she tried to use. About a month into the official divorce proceedings, my attorney called me with some genuinely amusing news. "We've received an unusual settlement request from Jessica's lawyer," she said, and I could hear the amusement in her professional voice. "They want to discuss some kind of financial support arrangement." "On what possible legal grounds?" I asked, genuinely curious about what ridiculous argument they could possibly make. "Apparently, Jessica is claiming that she sacrificed her promising career in order to support yours," my attorney explained. "Therefore, she believes she deserves ongoing financial support to help her get back on her feet." I let out a bitter laugh. "She quit her $45,000 job so she could sit at home and spend my money for 2 years straight. How exactly did that sacrifice support my career in any meaningful way?" "That's exactly the response I expected from you," my attorney said. "But here's where this story gets really interesting. Her new boyfriend, the one with the fancy Rolex watch, turns out he's not quite the wealthy businessman he pretended to be." My attorney had done some professional investigative work into Jessica's lover, and what she discovered was absolutely perfect. Jessica's so-called wealthy boyfriend wasn't actually the successful businessman he had pretended to be. The expensive Rolex watch he wore was a convincing fake. The upscale apartment where they had been meeting was nothing more than a short-term rental that he had been paying for with maxed-out credit cards. His supposed investment firm that sounded so impressive was actually little more than a one-man operation with a fancy website and no real assets. They were both essentially playing elaborate roles, my attorney explained with obvious amusement. He was pretending to be wealthy in order to attract women like Jessica, who were looking for financial security. She was pretending to be an available trophy wife who was looking to upgrade to a better situation. The problem is that neither one of them actually had any real money to back up their fantasies. The irony of the situation was almost too perfect to believe. But it got even better. Jessica's parents, who had always been somewhat cold and distant during our entire marriage because they had wanted her to marry a doctor or a lawyer instead of a government worker, were now completely refusing to help her financially. They were deeply embarrassed by the divorce and her behavior, and they wanted nothing to do with the mess she had created. So what exactly is she asking for in this settlement request? I asked my attorney. She's requesting $5,000 per month for 2 full years to help her get back on her feet, my attorney replied. Plus additional financial assistance with her transition back into the workforce. I didn't even need to verbally respond to that ridiculous request. My attorney could hear my answer clearly in the silence that followed her explanation. That's exactly what I thought your response would be, she said with satisfaction. I'll let them know that we'll see them in court. 2 days after my attorney rejected Jessica's ridiculous settlement demand, I received a completely unexpected text message from Jessica's lover. We need to talk, but not about her or the relationship, he wrote. This is about a potential business opportunity that could be mutually beneficial for both of us. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet him at a busy public coffee shop in downtown. When I arrived at our agreed meeting spot, I barely recognized the man sitting across from me. Gone was the slicked-back hair and the designer clothes that he had worn in all those photos with Jessica. He looked like a man who had been completely defeated by life. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me, he said nervously, fidgeting constantly with his watch, which I noticed was now a basic Timex instead of the fake Rolex he used to wear. I'll get straight to the point here. I know that I completely screwed you over, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness. What exactly do you want then? I asked directly, not interested in beating around the bush. Look, Jessica has been telling everyone who will listen that you're the bad guy in this whole situation, he said, running his hand through his hair. She's claiming that you cut her off financially without any warning whatsoever, that you're hiding money from the divorce proceedings, and that you were emotionally abusive throughout your marriage. None of this surprised me in the least. It was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd come to expect from Jessica. And every single word of it is complete lies, he continued with obvious disgust. All of it. She told me the exact same garbage about you when we first met. She said you were controlling and cold, that you never gave her anything she wanted, that you kept her trapped in an unhappy marriage. He ran his hand through his hair again, looking genuinely ashamed. But I've seen how she actually operates now, and I understand what kind of person she really is. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photographs of his apartment. The images showed slashed furniture, broken electronics, and clothes that had been deliberately cut into pieces. It was exactly the same pattern of vindictive destruction that I had discovered in my own condo. Why are you showing me this? I asked, still not understanding his motivation. Because I'm willing to testify in court about everything that happened, he said seriously. The lies she told, the manipulation tactics she used, how she bragged about muting your phone calls while your mother was dying in the hospital. He looked genuinely disgusted as he spoke. I've done some pretty shitty things in my life, but what she did to you while you were grieving your mother, that's just pure evil. I studied his face carefully, trying to determine whether this was some kind of elaborate setup. What do you get out of helping me? He looked down at the table, clearly embarrassed. She stole about $7,000 in cash from me, plus some jewelry that actually was real, family heirlooms that belonged to my grandmother. I know for a fact that she pawned all of it to get quick cash. I don't have the money to hire a lawyer to go after her legally, but I want those items back. It was essentially a deal with the devil, but sometimes the devil can be surprisingly useful. I had my attorney draw up a formal statement for him to sign, detailing everything he had told me plus additional information about Jessica's spending habits and manipulative behavior patterns. In exchange, I agreed to help him recover the monetary value of his stolen property if his testimony proved valuable during the court proceedings. The day of our official court hearing finally arrived. Jessica showed up looking every bit the part of the wronged, innocent wife. She wore a modest dress, minimal makeup, and was even carrying a Bible, clearly trying to present herself as a virtuous woman who had been cruelly wronged. The carefully constructed act might have actually worked if we hadn't been so thoroughly prepared for exactly this kind of performance. Her lawyer presented Jessica's case first, painting a picture of a devoted wife who had sacrificed her promising career for the sake of her husband's success. They claimed that I had cut her off financially without any warning and that I was being cruel and vindictive during what they described as her time of grief over my mother's death. When it was our turn to present our case, my attorney was absolutely methodical and devastating. First, she presented the detailed financial records showing Jessica's extravagant spending spree during the exact time period when my mother was dying. Then came the official police report documenting the deliberate destruction of my personal property, including the heartbreaking destruction of my mother's precious keepsakes. She showed photographs of the completely trashed condo and presented documentation proving that I had owned the property entirely before our marriage. And then came our surprise witness, Jessica's former lover walking into the courtroom. When Jessica's former lover walked into the courtroom, the color completely drained from Jessica's face. Her lawyer was clearly blindsided by this unexpected development and immediately asked for a recess, which the judge promptly denied. What followed was absolutely the most satisfying hour of courtroom testimony that I could have possibly imagined. Jessica's former lover methodically detailed their entire affair from beginning to end. He testified that their relationship had actually started nearly a full year before my mother's illness was even diagnosed, completely destroying Jessica's timeline and her claims about when things went wrong in our marriage. He confirmed under oath that Jessica had deliberately muted my phone calls and had actually laughed about it while I was making funeral arrangements for my mother. He described in detail how she had talked constantly about divorcing me and taking half of everything I owned once she had successfully secured what she called her upgrade to a wealthier man. By the time he finished his devastating testimony, Jessica was openly sobbing in the courtroom. But these weren't tears of genuine remorse or regret. They were tears of pure rage and humiliation as she watched her carefully constructed narrative crumble completely in front of the judge and everyone present. The judge appeared completely unmoved by Jessica's emotional display. His ruling was swift, decisive, and absolutely everything I could have hoped for. First, the condo would remain entirely mine with no equity share going to Jessica whatsoever. Second, our marital assets would be divided, but with significant consideration given to the documented financial misconduct that Jessica had committed. Third, her request for any kind of ongoing spousal support was denied completely and permanently. Fourth, she was ordered to pay full restitution for all the property damage she had deliberately caused. It was a total and complete legal victory on every single front. As we left the courtroom, Jessica desperately tried to approach me, but she was immediately blocked by my attorney who stepped between us. "This isn't over!" Jessica hissed through her tears, with mascara streaming down her face in dark streaks. "You've completely ruined my entire life." I looked at her with complete calm and composure. "You silenced me when I needed you most," I replied evenly. "I'm just returning the favor." The aftermath of the court decision was swift and brutal for Jessica. She suddenly found herself with no husband, no boyfriend, no home, and no money. Her reputation in our social circle was completely damaged, and her fantasy of upgrading to a wealthier man had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Within just 1 week of the court ruling, I received a desperate email from Jessica. "Please, I have absolutely nowhere to go," she wrote. "My parents won't take me in, and I have no money for rent anywhere. Can we please just talk about this situation? I've learned my lesson and I understand what I did wrong." I didn't respond to her email at all. Then came a series of text messages from her friends, all trying to guilt me into helping her. "Jessica's literally living in her car right now," one of them wrote. "This has gone way too far. You've made your point." I systematically blocked every single one of those numbers without responding. Finally, I received a message from Jessica's sister, someone I had barely spoken to during our entire marriage. "She's truly hit rock bottom at this point," the message read. "She lost her phone, got fired from her new job due to emotional instability, and had to sell most of her possessions just to survive. She's begging for another chance, not as your wife, but just for some help until she can get back on her feet. I considered this message for a long time. Not because I was softening toward Jessica or having second thoughts, but because I wanted my response to be absolutely perfect. Tell Jessica that I've muted her life just like she muted my calls, I finally replied. The difference is that I'm being completely upfront about it. It's been a full year now since the divorce was officially finalized by the court. I wish I could tell you that the journey of recovery and rebuilding was easy, but grief never is. Whether you're mourning the loss of a beloved mother or the death of a marriage that you thought meant something, the difference lies in how you choose to honor what has been lost and how you move forward with your life. I received a significant promotion at work, along with a substantial salary increase that reflected my dedicated performance on that major infrastructure project. The condo that I once shared with Jessica has been completely renovated from top to bottom. Every single trace of her taste and influence has been removed and replaced with things that actually matter to me and reflect who I truly am. I even adopted a rescue dog from the local animal shelter, something Jessica had always adamantly refused because she was worried a pet might mess up her expensive clothes or damage her precious furniture. Last month, I unexpectedly ran into Jessica's father at our local grocery store. I braced myself for potential hostility or confrontation, but he surprised me with his reaction. "You look well," he said, his eyes carefully assessing my appearance and demeanor. "I am well," I replied with complete honesty. He nodded thoughtfully. "She's not doing well at all," he said matter-of-factly. "She finally had to move back home with us, and she's working retail now. She still blames everyone but herself for what happened." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And part of me actually meant it. Not because I wished her well or wanted to help her, but because I genuinely felt sorry for people who never learn from their mistakes and continue to make the same destructive choices. "You know," he said thoughtfully, looking directly into my eyes, "when her mother tried to pull the same kind of stunt on me about 30 years ago, I chose to forgive her and take her back. It was the biggest mistake of my entire life. I spent the next 30 years married to someone who never truly respected me or valued what I brought to the relationship. He extended his hand to me with what appeared to be genuine respect. You're a much stronger man than I ever was." 2 weeks ago, I heard through our circle of mutual friends that Jessica is now telling people that she has found herself and is stronger than ever after surviving what she describes as an abusive relationship. The narrative has shifted once again, with her painting herself as a brave survivor rather than acknowledging that she was the architect of her own complete downfall. But honestly, it doesn't matter to me anymore. The people who know the real truth know it, and the people who matter in my life believe me and support me. Yesterday, I visited my mother's gravesite as I do every few weeks. I sat there in the peaceful afternoon sunshine, talking to her as the warm rays heated the granite headstone. I told her about everything that had happened over the past year, about finding my footing again after losing her, about the lessons I had learned the hard way, about slowly rebuilding my life into something better than it was before. "You always told me to pay close attention to how people treat you when it's inconvenient for them," I said to her gravestone. "That was the best advice you ever gave me, Mom." As I was preparing to leave the cemetery, my phone rang with a number that I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment and usual policy, I decided to answer it. "Please don't hang up on me," came Jessica's voice, smaller and more fragile than I remembered it being. I need some kind of closure from all of this. Why won't you even talk to me after 5 years of being together? Don't I deserve at least that much?" I thought about her question for a long moment before responding. "You know what real closure actually is, Jessica?" I said calmly. "It's accepting the fact that some bridges can't be unburned once you've destroyed them. It's understanding that actions have permanent consequences that you can't just apologize away." "I've changed," she insisted desperately. "I've learned from my mistakes." "No," I interrupted her calmly but firmly. "You haven't changed at all because you're still making this entire conversation about what you deserve and what you need. Even now, after everything that's happened, you still can't see past yourself." I ended the call immediately and blocked that number as well, adding it to the dozens of other numbers already on my constantly growing list. The phone in my pocket now contains only connections that have proven themselves to be reliable and trustworthy. People who would never even consider silencing me during my darkest hour. People who understand that love without genuine respect is nothing more than manipulation wearing a convincing mask. Some people in my life have called my response to Jessica's betrayal extreme and over the top. "You completely destroyed her entire life," one former friend remarked to me recently. "Don't you think that's taking it a bit too far? Don't you think that's overkill?" But that perspective completely misses the fundamental point of everything that happened. I didn't destroy Jessica's life. Her own choices and actions did that all by themselves. I simply refused to shield her from the natural consequences of her decisions. I refused to enable her behavior or pretend that what she did was somehow acceptable. The most important lesson that I've learned from this entire experience hasn't actually been about Jessica's betrayal, devastating as that was. It's been about my own response to that betrayal and what it taught me about my own self-worth. I've learned that personal dignity isn't measured by what other people do to you, but rather by how you refuse to compromise your own self-worth in the aftermath of their actions. Jessica silenced me for 2 weeks when I needed her most desperately. In response, I didn't just temporarily mute her the way she had done to me. I showed her what it truly means to be completely cut off from someone's life. Not temporarily in a moment of anger, and not as some kind of emotional manipulation tactic, but permanently and with the calm certainty of a decision that honors my own worth as a human being. As I finish writing this incredibly long story, my phone pings with new messages. But these are messages from friends who are checking in on me to see how I'm doing. Messages from colleagues at work who respect my input and value my professional opinion. Messages from my dog walker sending me adorable pictures of my happy rescue dog enjoying his daily walks. These are the connections that I have actively chosen to keep in my life, and they represent the kind of relationships that are built on mutual respect and genuine care. When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them the first time. When someone demonstrates exactly what you're worth to them through their actions, believe that assessment as well. And then act accordingly, with the full knowledge that you deserve to be surrounded by people who would never dream of silencing you when you need them most. The old me would have probably tried to save the marriage, made excuses for Jessica's behavior, and convinced myself that I could somehow fix whatever was broken between us. The new me understands that some people will show you exactly who they are when it matters most, and the healthiest response is to believe them and adjust your life accordingly. I wake up every morning in a home that is entirely mine, surrounded by things that bring me genuine joy rather than serving someone else's image. I go to work at a job where I'm respected and valued for my contributions. I come home to a dog who is genuinely excited to see me every single day. And I sleep peacefully every night knowing that every person who has access to my life has earned that privilege through their consistent actions, not just their words. Jessica chose to silence me when I was at my most vulnerable. I chose to honor my own worth by making that silence permanent. The difference between us is that I was honest about my intentions from the very beginning, while she operated through deception and manipulation. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Some people, once they've shown you their true character, don't deserve a second chance to hurt you. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to accept that someone you once loved simply isn't worthy of the space they once occupied in your life. That's my story. Take from it what you will.